"I didn't take it, Charlotte. You have to believe me." The words hung in the air, sharp and desperate, as the laughter in the mansion died suddenly. Lena Morales, the Kingston family maid, stood frozen, heart racing. In the grand living room, guests were still sipping champagne, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the polished walls of Vincent Kingston's opulent mansion. A single accusation, one she could never undo, had shattered everything she had worked for. Charlotte Kingston, her employer's wife, had just accused her of stealing a fortune in priceless family jewels. But there was one thing Charlotte didn't know. The truth would soon turn the entire Kingston family upside down. And it wasn't Lena who would pay the price. If you think that's the end of the story, think again. There's more to Charlotte's lies than just stolen jewels. Watch till the end if you want to find out who the real criminal is, because the truth is even more shocking than the lies. Lena's life had always been about survival. Working in the mansion of the Kingston family for years, she learned how to stay invisible, how to blend into the background, serving without question. Her life was a quiet one, centered around the work and the small joys of caring for Ethan Kingston, Vincent's son. But that night, as the guests celebrated in the glittering ballroom, the rug was pulled from beneath her feet. What was supposed to be an ordinary evening of serving drinks and clearing tables had spiraled into an accusation that could destroy everything Lena had built. The missing jewels, the family heirlooms, were just the beginning. What Lena didn't realize then was that Charlotte Kingston, the woman she had quietly served for years, was not just accusing her to cover up a theft. No, Charlotte had far more to hide than anyone could have imagined. And it was Ethan, Vincent's teenage son, who would uncover the truth that would change the Kingston family forever. If you believe in justice and that no one should be falsely accused, hit subscribe. Only manipulators like Charlotte won't. Comment: I stand for truth. If you do too, let's hear your thoughts below. As the truth begins to unfold, secrets deeper than the missing jewels emerge. Secrets that will challenge everything Lena thought she knew about the people who once employed her. But none of this would have come to light if not for Ethan. A boy caught between love and betrayal, willing to risk everything to protect the one person who always showed him kindness. Now, it's time for the real story to begin, and the consequences of Charlotte's lies will reverberate far beyond the walls of the Kingston mansion. Chapter 2. The Fallout Now. It's time for the real story to begin, and the consequences of Charlotte's lies will reverberate far beyond the walls of the Kingston mansion. Lena stood in the cold, marble entryway of the Kingston mansion, her heart pounding, as the grand double doors swung shut behind her. The sound echoed, louder than she could have imagined. The world she had known for the past 5 years, her life as a maid, her quiet place among the ultra-wealthy, was slipping through her fingers like sand in a storm. Her hands were trembling as she gripped the handle of her small, battered suitcase, the one she had brought to work with her every morning without thinking, as if today would always be the same. She never imagined she would be leaving under these circumstances. "I never stole anything," she whispered to herself, the words meaningless now. They had fallen on deaf ears. The guests who had once called her by name now only saw a criminal. The truth was irrelevant. Charlotte's accusation had been sharp, like a dagger through her chest, and nothing she said would undo the damage already done. As the limo drove her away from the mansion, the towering gates closing behind her with a finality that struck her harder than anything, she couldn't help but glance back at the grand facade of the Kingston estate. The life she had worked so hard to build within its walls was gone thus, and there was nothing left but the bitter taste of betrayal. Lena's struggles. The next few days were a blur of rejection. Every door she knocked on, hoping for even a chance to explain herself, slammed in her face. Her name, once trusted in the households of the rich and powerful, had become a curse. The whispers of thief followed her wherever she went, catching in the air like smoke, choking her resolve. She was turned away from a job she was offered by the Fletchers, a couple who had always treated her well. The woman smiled politely when she opened the door, but as soon as she mentioned the Kingston estate, the expression changed. "I'm sorry, Lena. The position's been filled," Mrs. Fletcher said quickly, her voice polite but her eyes cold. Knowing full well why Lena had been let go from the Kingston mansion, Lena could barely speak. The words caught in her throat. "But I've worked for the Kingstons for years. I have," she stopped herself. It didn't matter. No one cared for her side of the story. The moment Charlotte had accused her, her name had been ruined. She left the Fletcher house with her shoulders heavy, as if the weight of 1,000 accusations were pressing down on her chest. It wasn't the first time she'd been turned away, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The wealthy world she had once belonged to had no place for a maid with a tarnished reputation. Lena's feet felt like they were made of stone as she walked the streets of the city. Her apartment was small and dark, the walls closing in on her, yet somehow, the loneliness of it all felt suffocating. The money she had saved up, the small cushion that had allowed her to survive in the world of the privileged, was quickly disappearing. Rent, food, her mother's medicine, none of it was going to come easily now. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, the familiar soft tone that had always carried the weight of a woman who had struggled but never given up. "Mija, how are you? Are you doing okay?" She picked up the phone, dialed the familiar number, and waited. When the voice on the other end picked up, it was frail, distant, the kind of voice she had learned to brace herself for. "Hola, Mama," Lena said softly, blinking back tears. "I'm fine, Mama. Just tired from work." Her mother asked, as always, about the little things. How her work was going, whether she had enough money for her treatment. But the question hung heavy in the air. Did Lena still have enough? "Did you save enough for my medicine?" her mother asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Lena paused. Her chest tightened, but she forced the lie out, knowing there was no other option. "Yes, Mama. I'll send it tomorrow. I promise." The call ended with a few words of thanks and blessings. But as Lena sat there, the silence of her apartment enveloping her, she realized she had no way of fulfilling that promise. The little she had saved was gone now. She had no job, no prospects. She was alone, discarded, just like the woman who had accused her. Ethan Kingston hadn't been the same since the night Lena was thrown out of the mansion. He didn't cry in front of anyone, but his eyes were heavy. His usual spark dimmed. He was only a boy, 17, but still young enough to be torn between loyalty and truth. He knew something wasn't right. His stepmother, Charlotte, had been too quick to accuse Lena, too certain of Lena's guilt despite the lack of evidence. Ethan's mind churned with doubt. He remembered Lena's face when Charlotte had made the accusation, how her eyes had filled with shock, then pain, the way she had pleaded with his father. "She didn't do it," Ethan had whispered to his father late that night, his words hanging in the air, raw with uncertainty. "She didn't take the necklace. I know she didn't." Vincent had said nothing in response, his face hard, like a wall Ethan couldn't break through. He had to believe his wife. He had to. Charlotte was the woman he loved, the woman he had married. But now, Ethan wondered, Had Charlotte known all along that Lena was innocent? Or was there something else, something darker at play? He couldn't let it go. He couldn't ignore what was happening in his house, not when his father seemed so lost, so unwilling to see the truth. But he also couldn't deny the tension between his parents. Charlotte was colder now, more distant, and Vincent seemed to carry a weight he hadn't seen before. He was confused. He didn't know whom to trust. Ethan spent the next few days avoiding Charlotte as best he could, retreating into his room where the walls felt safer. But the questions never stopped. And as each day passed, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, something far beyond the missing necklace. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against her, Lena refused to give up. Her reputation might be tarnished, but her resolve remained unbroken. She would not let Charlotte's lies define her. She had a plan. She would find the missing necklace. She would uncover the truth. And if Charlotte thought she could destroy her so easily, Lena would prove her wrong. She might not have a fancy lawyer or a rich family to back her, but Lena had something that could never be taken away: the truth. And she would fight for it, no matter what it cost her. She had already lost so much: her job, her place in the Kingston household, the trust of the only family she had known for years. But she was determined not to lose herself. In her small apartment, Lena sat at the edge of her bed, going over the details in her mind. She remembered the gala, the guests, the way Charlotte had glared at her from across the room, as if she already knew what was going to happen. It was all too perfect. The way Charlotte had quickly pointed the finger, the way her lies had been so rehearsed. Lena could feel the pieces of the puzzle starting to fall into place. She wasn't just fighting to clear her name. She was fighting to bring the truth into the light. And she would do whatever it took to make sure Charlotte's lies were exposed for what they were. Vincent Kingston stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his tie. But his mind wasn't on his appearance. His mind was on his wife, and the growing suspicion that something had gone terribly wrong. It wasn't just Lena's accusation that weighed on him. It was the cracks he had started to notice in his marriage. The way Charlotte seemed more focused on keeping up appearances than on caring for Ethan or himself. It was the way she dismissed his concerns, the way she spun everything to suit her own agenda. And yet, he still couldn't shake the thought that there was more to this than he could see. Why had Charlotte been so quick to accuse Lena? What was she hiding? Vincent didn't have answers, only frustration. He couldn't trust Charlotte completely anymore. And as he tried to reach out to Ethan, he found his son more distant, more withdrawn. The boy knew something. Vincent could feel it. But what was the truth? And if Charlotte was lying about Lena, what else had she lied about? Ethan Kingston sat in his room, the glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across the walls, his mind racing. He couldn't shake the images from the night of the gala, the tension, his father's stiff silence, his mother's too perfect tears. But most of all, he couldn't forget Lena's face when she was accused of stealing the necklace. She didn't do it, Ethan thought, his fingers tapping nervously on the edge of his desk. His gut had been telling him that from the moment Charlotte had made the accusation. But there was something else, something more. The more he thought about it, the more the events of that night felt wrong. In the past few days, he had tried to push those thoughts away, trying to convince himself that his loyalty to his family should outweigh the nagging doubt in his heart. But now, he couldn't ignore it any longer. Lena had worked in this house for years. She was practically a part of the family. There was no way she could steal from them. He was certain of that. But what if someone else had done it? And if someone else had done it? Who? Ethan couldn't sit still any longer. His room, once a sanctuary of quiet, had become a cage. With the house eerily quiet around him, he decided it was time to find answers. He couldn't just wait for his father to figure this out, or worse, for Charlotte to spin her lies and get away with it. For the past few days, he had observed his stepmother, Charlotte. And with each passing moment, his suspicions only deepened. She was too calm, too collected, almost as if she had been expecting Lena's fall from grace. The moment Lena was accused, Charlotte had slipped into that familiar mask of perfection. No cracks, no guilt, no second thoughts. It made Ethan sick. His first step was to investigate the details of the theft. The timeline was murky. Charlotte had claimed the necklace disappeared sometime after the guests had started arriving, but no one had seen anything. It was impossible to be sure exactly when or how it had been taken. But one thing stuck in Ethan's mind: Charlotte's insistence that Lena was guilty. Ethan had been out of the room when his stepmother made the accusation, but he'd overheard the conversations that followed. Everyone had taken her side, assuming Lena's guilt without question. Everyone but Ethan. He needed to know exactly when the necklace had gone missing, and more importantly, how it had disappeared without anyone noticing. The safe had been tampered with, that much was clear. But who had the access to it? Who could have pulled off a stunt like that right under his father's nose? It took Ethan several days of sneaking around, trying to piece together the facts without alerting anyone. The more he looked, the more he found things that didn't add up. One night, while his father was away on a business trip, Ethan slipped into the study, the place where the necklace had last been seen. The safe where the jewelry had been kept was hidden behind a portrait of the Kingston family. The heavy wooden door, which should have been locked securely, was slightly ajar. Ethan ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the safe, his mind racing. He wasn't an expert, but even he could tell that the lock hadn't been broken. There were no signs of forced entry, no scratches around the handle, no indication that the safe had been tampered with in any noticeable way. But the necklace was gone. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. How could it have disappeared if the safe was still intact? The only explanation that made sense was that the thief had known the combination. And that could only mean one thing: the thief was someone inside the house. But who? And why target Lena? Why not just take the necklace and disappear? Why make it so personal? Ethan spent the next few hours pacing the study, his mind racing, trying to piece the puzzle together. He thought back to the gala. Charlotte's behavior was strange, even for her. She had been unusually insistent on monitoring everything that happened that night. She'd even sent him away early, telling him to spend time with the other guests rather than staying close to Lena, who had been working. Why? The more Ethan thought about it, the more he realized that Charlotte's presence in the room had been too strategic. She hadn't just noticed that Lena was near the study. She had been watching for it. She had known exactly when Lena was there. Ethan's suspicions grew, but so did the tension between him and Charlotte. After his little investigation, he couldn't look at her the same way anymore. Her perfectly rehearsed smiles, the way she held herself with that air of superiority, it all seemed so fake. Charlotte had begun to pressure him. She needed his support. She needed him to believe Lena had stolen the necklace. But Ethan couldn't bring himself to do it. It wasn't just because he didn't believe Lena was guilty. It was because there was something off about Charlotte's behavior. Every time she asked him to confirm her side of the story, it felt like a manipulation, a calculated move to keep him on her side, away from the truth. "Ethan," Charlotte said one evening, finding him in the library, her voice smooth but tight. You have to understand, this situation isn't about what's fair. It's about protecting the family. Your father is already under enough pressure. We don't need this scandal. Ethan shifted uncomfortably. I don't think Lena did it, he said quietly, not looking at her. Charlotte's eyes hardened, but she maintained her composure. You don't know that, and you can't let your emotions cloud your judgment. Lena had access to the study, and she's been sneaking around the house lately. Don't let her fool you, Ethan. Something in Ethan snapped. He turned to face her, his voice low but firm. I'm not blind, Charlotte. I know something's not right. And I'm not going to sit here and let you make me believe something that's clearly a lie. Charlotte's eyes flashed with anger, but she quickly regained her composure, masking her frustration with that smile of hers. You'll see, Ethan. You'll see. This isn't just about you and me. This is about doing what's best for your father. He's counting on us. Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on him. He couldn't let this go. But what could he do? He was just a kid, and Charlotte had everyone on her side. He couldn't expose the truth alone, not yet. The next day, Ethan decided to follow his instincts. He was sure there was more to the story than he had discovered so far. He knew there had to be something Charlotte was hiding, some piece of evidence that would expose the truth. As he wandered through the mansion, his eyes scanning every corner, something caught his eye. A small piece of paper, crumpled and half hidden beneath a cushion in the living room. He pulled it out and flattened it. It was a bank statement, and the name at the top was unmistakable. Charlotte Kingston. Ethan's heart pounded as he read the details. Large withdrawals from the family's account. Payments to casinos. A pattern of secrecy. Charlotte's gambling debts were far larger than anyone knew. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Was this why she had framed Lena? Had she staged the theft to cover up her growing financial problems? The more he read, the more convinced he became. Charlotte was hiding something far worse than a missing necklace. She was deep in debt, and the theft was just a diversion. Ethan stuffed the paper back into his pocket, his hands shaking. The walls felt like they were closing in on him. How could he expose Charlotte now? What if his father didn't believe him? What if he, too, was blinded by her manipulation? Ethan sat at the edge of his bed, the dim light of the lamp flickering against the walls, casting long shadows in the room. His fingers drummed rhythmically on the desk, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been days since he had started his quiet investigation into Charlotte's involvement in the theft, and the more he uncovered, the more he realized that the truth stretched far beyond a missing necklace. There were pieces of a puzzle that didn't fit, and they all led back to her. Everywhere he looked, he saw her hand in it. Manipulating, scheming, controlling. But the deeper he dug, the more he realized Charlotte wasn't just protecting her reputation. No, there was something bigger at play. The theft was merely a distraction, a piece of a much darker puzzle. The suspicion had been gnawing at him for days, eating away at his resolve. The more Ethan observed Charlotte's behavior, the more it became clear that she wasn't just upset about the missing necklace. She was terrified. But terrified of what? She wasn't acting like an innocent woman trying to protect her husband's belongings. She was acting like someone trying to cover up a much bigger lie. Ethan had watched her closely, noting her every move, her every word. Charlotte had been so eager to have Lena removed, so quick to accuse her of theft, and so dismissive of Ethan's protestations. She wasn't just trying to protect the family's reputation. She was protecting something else. His suspicion deepened when Charlotte continued to avoid talking about the details of the night the necklace went missing. Every time he asked a simple question, what time did she last see the necklace? How had the safe been accessed? Charlotte brushed him off, as if his curiosity was a threat. The more she shut him out, the more Ethan's gut told him that there was something else she was hiding. He had to know what that was. The first real break came one evening when Ethan stumbled across a set of emails. He was going through Charlotte's office, a place he had been forbidden to enter for as long as he could remember. But now it seemed like the only place he could find answers. His heart hammered as he scrolled through the messages, feeling the familiar sense of dread creep up his spine. The emails were clear. They were between Charlotte and a man named Daniel Hayes, a name Ethan had heard before but never connected to his stepmother. Daniel was a business partner of his father's, but Ethan had always felt something off about him, a little too charming, a little too smooth. And now, with the discovery of these emails, Ethan's suspicions were confirmed. The emails were filled with coded language, talk of secret meetings, plans for a deal that would benefit them both. The subject matter didn't seem to fit with what he'd known about Charlotte's supposed loyalty to Vincent. These were not the words of a loyal wife. They were the words of a woman planning something much darker, something Vincent couldn't know. He trusts you. He trusts both of us, one email read, signed with a kiss. Another spoke of moving the assets, once Vincent was out of the picture. Ethan's stomach turned. What were they planning? And why was Charlotte, including his father, so blind to it? The realization hit Ethan hard. Charlotte wasn't just betraying his father with this theft. She was involved in something far more dangerous. This affair with Daniel was likely a key to something larger. Was it about money, power, or something worse? If Ethan had thought he was close to the truth before, the next discovery confirmed his worst fears. While rummaging through Charlotte's financial files, hoping to find more clues, Ethan found what looked like a regular set of bills and banking statements. But then something caught his eye. One of the statements was for a large sum of money, way too large to be normal. It was a payment to an online gambling website, along with other payments to various casinos. His heart sank. The deeper he dug, the more the pattern became clear. Charlotte had racked up significant gambling debts that amounted to millions of dollars. She'd drained their bank accounts in secret, withdrawing large sums for what? To fund her affair? To pay off her gambling losses? It made sense now. The theft, the way she had accused Lena so quickly, the way she manipulated the situation, it was all part of a cover-up. The missing necklace wasn't just a loss for the family. It was part of a larger plan to cover Charlotte's tracks. If Lena was framed for the theft, it would take the heat off Charlotte's financial ruin. Ethan's head spun. How had his father not seen this? How had he been so blind to the mounting evidence that his wife was not the woman he thought she was? But now that Ethan had the evidence, what was he supposed to do with it? Part of him wanted to confront Charlotte immediately, demand that she explain herself, tell his father what he had uncovered. But another part of him feared what would happen if he did. What if Charlotte had something even worse up her sleeve? What if confronting her would push her to do something irreversible? Ethan knew too well how dangerous secrets like these could be. People like Charlotte didn't just cover up their mistakes. They destroyed anyone who threatened to expose them. But then there was the other side of the dilemma. Could he let his father continue to live this lie? Could he allow Charlotte to keep manipulating him, ruining everything they had? Ethan couldn't stand the thought of it. His father was already lost in his guilt over Lena's accusation. What would happen when Vincent discovered the truth about Charlotte? the whole world would crumble. But exposing Charlotte meant risking everything. It meant tearing apart his family. And worse, it meant making a choice between loyalty to his father or loyalty to the truth. Ethan paced back and forth in his room, struggling with the decision. If he didn't act soon, Charlotte's lies would become too big to unravel. But the consequences of revealing everything were just as terrifying. Would his father believe him? Would Vincent even care? Or would he remain blinded by his love for his wife? The following day, Ethan stood in front of the mansion, the weight of the decision hanging over him like a storm cloud. He had to find the final piece of the puzzle. If there was one thing he knew, it was that he couldn't expose Charlotte on half the truth. He needed more. He needed to dig deeper. Ethan made up his mind. He would gather more evidence, something irrefutable, something that couldn't be denied. He knew the truth was out there. He just had to find it. As he walked down the hallway, heading toward his next move, a sense of resolve filled him. No matter the cost, no matter the consequences, he would expose Charlotte for who she truly was. And if that meant tearing his family apart, so be it. The tension in the house had reached its peak. The days since Ethan had uncovered the truth about Charlotte's lies had been unbearable. Every conversation felt like a mask. Every word spoken was laced with the hollow sweetness of deception. The walls of the Kingston mansion, once a symbol of opulence and family unity, now felt like a cage to Ethan. He couldn't ignore what he knew any longer. The truth needed to be exposed, and it needed to happen now. Ethan couldn't stand it anymore. The lies, the manipulation, the way Charlotte had turned his father's world upside down. She had been doing it for years, but now it was too much. Ethan could no longer pretend that he hadn't seen the cracks forming in their family. Charlotte had been hiding something much bigger than the missing necklace. And in that moment, standing at the threshold of the study, he knew he had to confront her, or he would lose everything. His father's trust, his own peace of mind, and the respect he had left for the woman who had poisoned their lives. Ethan waited until the house was quiet, until the usual hum of daily life had settled into a tense silence. It was late, and Vincent was out of town for a business trip, leaving Charlotte alone in the mansion. It was the perfect time. His heart beat loudly in his chest as he knocked on Charlotte's office door, trying to steady his breath. The door opened with an eerie slowness, revealing his stepmother sitting at her desk, meticulously rearranging papers. The calm, controlled atmosphere around her felt foreign to Ethan now. Everything about Charlotte's presence had always been perfect, designed to put everyone at ease. But now, all he could see were the lies wrapped in a glossy package. "Ethan," she said, her voice as smooth and calculated as ever. "What can I do for you?" Ethan felt a wave of anger and frustration rise inside him, but he pushed it down. This had to be about more than just a confrontation. This was about the truth. "I need you to tell me the truth, Charlotte," he said, his voice steady but firm. "About the necklace. About everything." Charlotte raised an eyebrow, her lips curling into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "What are you talking about, Ethan?" "I've already told you everything you need to know." "You're lying," Ethan snapped, stepping further into the room. "I know you're lying. I know about the gambling. I know about Daniel Hayes, and I know you're the one who staged the theft of that necklace." Charlotte's face shifted for a moment, the smile faltering, but only for an instant. Her eyes narrowed, and the mask slipped just enough for Ethan to see the flicker of panic beneath the surface. "Ethan, what has gotten into you?" she asked, her voice soft but tinged with annoyance. "You're making a terrible mistake accusing me like this." Stop lying, Ethan said, his voice rising. I've seen the emails. I've seen the bank statements. I know everything. You've been using Dad, using all of us, just to cover up your mistakes. You're deep in debt, and you've been covering it all up by throwing Lena under the bus. Why? What's really going on? Charlotte stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, the sudden motion sending a shock through Ethan's spine. She glared at him, her posture rigid, her control slipping for the first time in a long while. You're wrong, she hissed, her voice low and dangerous. You don't know anything. You've always been so easily manipulated. All of this, all of it. This is your fault. You're the one who has chosen to side with that maid, with her instead of your own family. Ethan felt a surge of anger he had never allowed himself to feel before. He had spent too long living under Charlotte's thumb, letting her play games with his father's life. This was it. There was no going back now. No, Charlotte, he said, his voice cracking with the weight of the truth. I see you for who you really are now. You've been using me all this time, just like you've been using Dad. You've been pulling the strings, making everything seem like it's his fault. But it's you who's been destroying everything. Charlotte's face flushed with fury. She stormed towards him, her steps sharp and quick. You think you know me? You think you've figured this out? She spat. You've always been a little boy, Ethan. A child who doesn't understand how the world really works. I've been protecting you, keeping you safe, keeping everything safe. But you want to destroy it all just because you can't see the bigger picture. Ethan's blood boiled. The way she spoke to him, like he was nothing, like his father was nothing. It was all too much. In that moment, everything he had tried to ignore over the years, the way Charlotte had pushed him aside, manipulated his father, and controlled their lives, came crashing down on him. You're the one who doesn't understand, Ethan said, his voice cold. You've been so focused on protecting your own secrets that you've forgotten what really matters. You've lied, you've cheated, and now you've dragged Lena into this mess. I won't stand by and let you destroy everything anymore. Charlotte's eyes widened with surprise, then narrowed with cold calculation. You think you can just tear this family apart with your little accusations? You think you can go to your father with this? You'll be the one who ends up losing everything, Ethan. Not me. Ethan could feel his heart pounding in his chest, but he stood his ground. He had been afraid of Charlotte for too long, and now he saw her for what she truly was. A master manipulator, a liar, and a woman who would stop at nothing to get what she wanted. Charlotte stepped closer, her breath sharp and quick, her eyes filled with rage. You don't understand what's at stake here, she said, her voice low but venomous. I've been trying to protect you from this, protect your life, and now you want to ruin everything. Ethan could feel the weight of her words, the manipulation, the lies all coming crashing down on him. But for the first time in his life, he saw through her. She wasn't protecting him. She wasn't protecting anyone but herself. You've been playing us all, he said, his voice trembling with the intensity of the moment. Dad's been blinded by his guilt, and you've taken advantage of that. But I won't let you do it anymore. Charlotte's face twisted with anger. You're nothing but a pawn in this game. You've always been. And now you want to destroy everything just because you don't like the way it works? Ethan clenched his fists. No, Charlotte. I'm done being a pawn. I'm done with your lies. For a moment, Charlotte stood still, her eyes searching his face for some sign of weakness. But Ethan refused to back down. He was done. He had seen enough. She had pushed him too far. Ethan took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision ahead of him. He couldn't let Charlotte win. He couldn't let her continue to control his father, to tear their family apart just to cover up her own selfishness. He turned and walked toward the door, feeling Charlotte's piercing gaze on his back. "I won't keep quiet about this, Charlotte," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "I have all the evidence I need, and I'm going to show Dad everything. You won't get away with this anymore." Charlotte's voice followed him, dripping with venom. "You think you're so clever, don't you, Ethan? You'll ruin your father's life, and you'll destroy everything. Don't you see that? Don't you understand what you're doing?" Ethan paused at the door, his hand on the handle. He turned to face her one last time. "I understand perfectly. I'm saving him from you." As he left her office, the weight of his decision hung heavy in the air. He knew that exposing Charlotte's lies meant breaking apart the fragile facade of his family. But it was the only way forward. He had no other choice. With the evidence in his hand, Ethan made his way to his father's study, knowing this was the moment that would change everything. The truth would come out, and he was ready to face whatever consequences lay ahead. Ethan had never seen his father like this before. He stood in front of him, his hands trembling slightly, holding the folder that contained the damning evidence. His heart pounded in his chest, each beat heavier than the last. This was it, the moment that would change everything. The mansion, which had once felt like a place of safety and security, now felt like a cage. The walls closed in as Ethan walked slowly toward his father's study, the heavy weight of the truth making his steps feel like they were dragging through wet concrete. Vincent Kingston, a man who had built his empire on trust and integrity, had no idea what was about to hit him. And as Ethan's hand reached for the door handle, he couldn't help but wonder, was this the right thing to do? He had the evidence, he had the emails, he had the bank statements, the affair, the gambling, the manipulation of Lena. It was all laid out before him. All he had to do was show his father. And yet, something inside of him felt torn. Ethan pushed open the door to the study, where Vincent sat behind his massive mahogany desk, working through the endless stream of emails and reports that never seemed to stop. He looked up as Ethan entered, a tired but welcoming smile on his face. "Ethan," Vincent said, motioning for him to come in. "What's on your mind, son?" Ethan felt a lump form in his throat, but he held his ground. He couldn't falter now. Not when his father was so blind to the woman who had been living under his roof, poisoning everything they had built. "I need to show you something," Ethan said, his voice steady but low. He walked toward the desk, the folder heavy in his hands. Vincent's smile faded as he watched his son approach, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What's this?" Vincent asked, his voice curious but edged with concern. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He opened the folder slowly, the weight of his decision pressing down on him with each page he turned. He spread the documents in front of his father. Emails between Charlotte and Daniel Hayes, the financial records showing Charlotte's gambling debts, and the timeline of events that had led to Lena's public humiliation. Vincent's face shifted as he scanned the papers, his eyes widening with disbelief. "Ethan, what is this?" Vincent asked, his voice tight with confusion. "What are you trying to say?" Ethan felt a knot in his stomach. "I'm saying that Charlotte is lying to you, Dad. She's been manipulating us all. She's been stealing from you, from us, and she's been having an affair with Daniel Hayes, one of your business rivals. She's been using you for years." Vincent blinked as if trying to process the words. What? What are you talking about?" Ethan didn't let up. He pushed the papers closer to Vincent. She's been gambling. She's in debt. And she framed Lena for the theft of the necklace to cover it all up. She's been playing us, Dad. Playing you. All this time. Vincent stared at the documents in stunned silence, the blood draining from his face as he looked at the damning evidence. His hands shook as he picked up one of the bank statements, his eyes scanning the numbers. "No," Vincent whispered, his voice barely audible. "This can't be true. Charlotte wouldn't." Ethan's heart ached. He had seen his father go through so much. Building his empire, raising Ethan after his first marriage fell apart, holding the family together even when things got tough. And now, Ethan was watching his father crumble. The man who had been so strong, so certain in everything he did, was now doubting everything he knew. "I'm sorry, Dad," Ethan said, his voice soft but unwavering. "But it's all true. She's been lying to you. She's been lying to us." Vincent sank back in his chair, his eyes flicking over the papers, his mind struggling to keep up with the reality that was unfolding before him. His hand gripped the edge of the desk, his knuckles turning white as if he could hold on to the truth just by clinging to the surface in front of him. This couldn't be real. His wife, Charlotte, the woman he had loved and trusted for years, the woman he had built a life with, was capable of something so monstrous? He had trusted her. He had always trusted her. But now the evidence was right in front of him. His entire world felt like it was collapsing. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" Vincent's voice was thick with emotion, the shock of betrayal and disbelief clouding his judgment. He looked up at Ethan, eyes wide with pain. "Why didn't you come to me sooner, Ethan?" Ethan took a step closer, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I couldn't. I didn't know how. I've been trying to figure it all out. But she's so good at manipulating everyone. I didn't want to believe it either. But I had to know the truth, Dad. For both of us." Vincent buried his face in his hands, shaking his head. "I can't believe this. I can't. She's been lying to me for so long and I didn't even see it." Ethan's chest tightened as he watched his father. It hurt. He knew how much this was going to break Vincent's heart. But Ethan also knew it needed to be done. His father had been living in a dream built on lies. Now the truth had to shatter that dream, no matter the cost. Charlotte entered the study with her usual poised grace, but the moment she saw the tension in the room, her expression shifted. She had known this was coming. She had known Ethan would eventually figure it out. But even as she entered, she couldn't hide the flicker of panic in her eyes. "Ethan, what's going on?" Charlotte asked, her voice a little too sweet, a little too controlled. Ethan didn't waste any time. He pointed to the evidence on the desk. "You're busted, Charlotte. It's all here. The gambling, the affair, the lies. It's all in the open now." Charlotte's eyes widened for a moment, but she quickly regained her composure, the mask slipping into place. "Ethan, I don't know what you think you're doing, but you're mistaken. This is all a misunderstanding. These papers, these emails, they don't mean anything. You've been misled. By Lena, I'm sure." Ethan stood tall, his jaw set with resolve. "Don't try to deny it. It's all here, Charlotte. You've been manipulating Dad, playing him like a fool, and you've been playing me too. But I'm done. I won't let you destroy this family any longer." Charlotte's calm facade shattered, her eyes flashing with anger. She lunged forward, slamming her hands down on the desk. "You think you can destroy me? You think I'm afraid of some little accusations? I am this family's protector. You know nothing about what's at stake here, Ethan." Her voice cracked with desperation. But Ethan wasn't backing down. He had already seen her for who she truly was. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. "You're not protecting anyone," Ethan said, his voice cold and sharp. "You're just protecting yourself. And now you're exposed." Charlotte's face contorted with fury. "I did what I had to do to survive, and you betrayed me. You and your father, always so blind. I had no choice, Ethan. You'll never understand." Vincent, still in shock, watched the confrontation unfold before him. His mind was struggling to reconcile the woman he had loved for so long with the monster standing before him now. He couldn't process it. Not all at once. For a long moment, Vincent said nothing. The silence between them stretched on, a weight too heavy to bear. The love he had for Charlotte, the trust he had given her, the years they had spent building a life together. Was it all a lie? Finally, Vincent spoke, his voice thick with pain. "You lied to me. You betrayed me. And worst of all, you used my son to cover your tracks." Charlotte's face went pale. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She could see the finality in Vincent's eyes. There was no escaping the truth now. Vincent stood up slowly, his hands shaking. "I'm done. You've destroyed this family, and I won't let you tear it apart any longer." In that moment, something inside Vincent broke. Something that had been holding him together all these years. His decision was made. There was no going back. Vincent turned to Ethan, his expression filled with regret, but also a deep, aching gratitude. "I'm sorry, son. I didn't see it. I didn't want to see it. But you've shown me the truth. And now I have to do what's right." With those words, Vincent walked to the phone and dialed the number for the authorities. "This is Vincent Kingston," he said quietly. "I need to report a crime. My wife, she's been involved in a conspiracy, and I want her arrested." As the phone call ended, Charlotte's world began to unravel. She stood there, stunned, her mind racing with thoughts of escape. But the door to the study opened, and the weight of the law came crashing down. In that moment, Charlotte Kingston, once untouchable, was arrested. Her empire of lies crumbling around her. Vincent stood at the edge of his broken family, his heart heavy with the realization of how much he had lost. Ethan, standing beside him, knew that the road ahead would be hard. But at least now, they had the truth. The lies were over. The Kingston family, as they had known it, was gone. And now, the real work would begin. The Kingston mansion, once a symbol of power and wealth, now felt like a shell of its former self. The grand chandeliers, the polished marble floors, the elegant rooms, all of it seemed hollow, drained of the life that had once made it home. The air was thick with distrust, and the echo of every step, every whispered conversation, seemed to reverberate through the empty spaces like a haunting reminder of the family's shattered illusions. Vincent Kingston sat alone in the study, his face drawn and haggard, staring out the large windows that overlooked the manicured gardens. The day was bright, but there was no light in his world now. The arrest of his wife, the woman he had loved for so many years, had left him reeling. His mind raced with the weight of all that had transpired, the painful truths that had come crashing down on him. How had he missed it? How had he been so blind to Charlotte's manipulation, to the lies she had fed him and the secrets she had hidden? The shame and guilt gnawed at him like an unrelenting tide. He had spent years building his business, creating a legacy, all the while believing he was living a life of happiness with his wife by his side. But now, he saw it all for what it truly was: an illusion. Charlotte had been playing him from the very beginning, using his trust and love as a weapon. And in the process, she had destroyed everything they had built, and worse, she had dragged their son, Ethan, into the chaos. Vincent closed his eyes, the pain of his own mistakes suffocating him. But there was more to regret than just his failed marriage. There was Lena. The aftermath of Charlotte's arrest had left the Kingston family in ruins. The servants who had once looked to her with reverence now avoided her name altogether, and the guests who had once adored her were quick to turn their backs. The whispers, the accusations, they filled the mansion's halls like an unbearable fog. Vincent had thought he could hold it all together, that his wealth and position could shield him from the consequences of Charlotte's lies. But he had been wrong. As the reality of the situation settled in, the gravity of what had happened became impossible to ignore. His family was fractured, his marriage was over, and his son had been the one who had uncovered the truth. He had failed Ethan in more ways than one. The house, once filled with laughter and conversations, now felt eerily quiet. Ethan had withdrawn into himself, his anger simmering just beneath the surface. The tension between father and son was palpable, each of them struggling to find their way back to the relationship they had once shared. Vincent hadn't been able to sleep for days. His mind raced with the same questions, the same regret. How had he let it get to this point? Why hadn't he seen the signs? But there was no time to dwell on the past. If he was to make things right, he had to start now. Vincent walked slowly through the mansion, each step heavy with the weight of the past. His eyes scanned the familiar rooms that had once been filled with warmth and life. The kitchen, where Lena had worked so tirelessly. The sitting room, where they had spent countless hours together as a family. Now, it all felt foreign to him, as if he had been living someone else's life. He stopped in front of the large family portrait that hung above the fireplace, his gaze lingering on the faces of his family, his younger self, Charlotte, and Ethan. They had been happy then, or so he had thought. The smiles on their faces seemed almost mocking now. Vincent's throat tightened as he thought about Lena. The woman he had trusted, the woman who had been by his side through so much, had been treated like an outsider in his home. And for what? For nothing more than Charlotte's jealousy and deceit. He could still see Lena's face when she was dragged out of the house, her eyes filled with disbelief, her voice pleading for him to believe her. He had stood there, paralyzed, unsure of what to do. And in that moment, he had failed her. The guilt consumed him. How could I have treated her like that, he thought. How could I have let Charlotte tear her down? Vincent knew that he couldn't undo the damage he had caused. But there was one thing he could do. He could make it right. He could bring Lena back. Not as a maid, not as an employee, but as someone who deserved to be treated with respect. With newfound resolve, Vincent made his decision. He would find Lena and apologize. He would show her that he recognized the truth now, that he was no longer blinded by Charlotte's lies. And he would do everything in his power to repair the damage Charlotte had caused. Lena hadn't expected this. After everything that had happened, the last thing she expected was an invitation to return to the Kingston mansion. Not as a maid, but as a guest. But there it was, the letter from Vincent, asking her to come back and stay for as long as she wanted. No strings attached, no conditions, just an open invitation to return. At first, Lena had been hesitant. She had spent years serving the Kingston family, pouring her heart into her work, only to be cast aside when Charlotte's lies had taken root. How could she go back to a place that had turned on her so easily? But there was something in Vincent's letter that made her pause. It wasn't just an apology. It was an acknowledgement of the truth. Vincent wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply asking for the chance to make things right. Lena sat on the edge of her bed in her small apartment, the letter in her hands, and thought about the life she had left behind. The loneliness, the uncertainty. It had been hard, but she had learned to survive. And yet, there was a part of her that still cared for the Kingstons, for Ethan in particular. She had loved him like a son. Her thoughts turned to Ethan. She hadn't heard from him since the night Charlotte was arrested. She had assumed he was struggling with the same emotional turmoil that Vincent was, caught between the man who had raised him and the truth that had come crashing down. But Lena knew Ethan was strong, stronger than any of them had given him credit for. And if he was ready to confront the truth, maybe it was time for her to do the same. With a deep breath, Lena made her decision. She would go back, not because she owed anyone anything, but because she deserved to be treated with respect. And if Vincent was sincere, if he truly wanted to make amends, then maybe, just maybe, there was a way forward for them all. The days following Charlotte's arrest had been a whirlwind for Ethan. The anger he had felt in the aftermath, at Charlotte, at his father, at himself, had slowly begun to subside, replaced by a growing sense of clarity. He was no longer the confused, naive teenager he had been just a few weeks ago. The truth had shattered his perception of the world, and in its place, something stronger had emerged. Ethan had spent long hours with his father, trying to rebuild the bond that had been fractured by Charlotte's lies. They had talked, really talked, for the first time in years, about the past, about the future, and about the choices they had made. Through it all, Ethan had come to understand that standing up for what was right wasn't always easy, but it was always necessary. He had faced the truth, no matter how painful it was, and had seen his father do the same. But now, as Lena's return loomed, Ethan knew that this was a pivotal moment. The truth had come to light, but the healing process had just begun. And for the first time in his life, Ethan knew that he was ready to face whatever came next, whether that meant confronting the past or building a new future. It was an unseasonably warm afternoon when the Kingston mansion began to feel like a home again, though it was a home forever changed. The echoes of betrayal and lies had not yet disappeared from the walls, but the cracks in the foundation were starting to mend, slowly but surely. The mansion that had once been filled with cold luxury and pretense now had the warmth of honest conversations, the hum of genuine connection. It was the kind of warmth that had been missing for years, masked by wealth and ambition. Vincent Kingston sat on the balcony, staring out at the sprawling grounds. The garden, once pristine and manicured to perfection, now looked lived in. The roses were a little overgrown, their branches twisting in unpruned directions, and the hedges had a wildness to them that made them feel real. Much like his family. The past months had been a blur of emotions. Charlotte's arrest had sent shockwaves through their lives. But what followed? The difficult conversations, the painful revelations, was beginning to feel like the beginning of something new. Something real. For the first time in years, Vincent felt the weight of his mistakes, but he also felt the stirrings of something far more important, a chance at redemption. Ethan had changed since that night, the night everything came crashing down. The boy who had once been trapped between his loyalty to his father and his suspicions about his stepmother was now a young man, confident and firm in his convictions. The long hours they spent together, in the wake of the truth's revelation, had brought them closer in a way that neither of them had anticipated. They had talked for hours, really talked, about things they had both kept buried for so long. Vincent found himself listening more than he had in years, really hearing what Ethan had to say. The walls that had been built between them, brick by brick over the years, were beginning to come down. They didn't always agree, and there was still a lot of hurt to work through. But for the first time in a long while, Vincent understood his son's pain. And more importantly, Ethan was starting to understand Vincent's. "Dad," Ethan had said one night, as they sat in the study, staring at the fireplace, "I know you did what you thought was best, but it still hurts. I don't know if you really understand how much it hurt to watch you choose her over me." Vincent's heart had broken at his son's words. How had he been so blind? How had he let Charlotte's manipulations cloud his judgment for so long? But he had heard it now, loud and clear. The truth had opened his eyes, and while it was painful, it was the kind of pain that brought growth. "I'm sorry, Ethan," Vincent had replied, his voice quiet but sincere. "I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Ethan had looked at him, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "It's going to take time, but I think we'll get there." And they would. Time, they both knew, would heal what had been broken. It had to. Lena's return to the Kingston household had not been easy. It wasn't just about stepping back into the mansion. It was about stepping into a new role, one that was far from what she had been accustomed to. For years, she had been the maid, the invisible woman behind the scenes. But now, she was part of something much bigger. At first, it had felt strange. The old dynamics still lingered. And though she was no longer just an employee, there was a hesitation. She could feel the shift in the atmosphere, the way she was now treated with respect. Not because it was expected, but because it was earned. Vincent had made sure of that. "Lena," he had said one afternoon, after a quiet conversation with Ethan, "I want to apologize. I was blind to what was happening. I treated you as if you were nothing more than someone to clean up after us. But you're not just that. You were part of this family. I see that now. And I'm sorry for how I treated you. You deserve so much more than that." Lena had been taken aback by his words. For so long, she had resigned herself to her place in the world. Always second, always just a step removed from the life that Vincent and Charlotte led. But now, it felt different. It felt real. "Thank you," Lena had whispered, the sincerity in her voice evident. "I've always tried to do my best, but I never expected this." Over time, her role in the house evolved. Vincent insisted she stay in the guest suite instead of the maid's quarters, though she had hesitated at first, unsure of how to accept such an offer. She had always been a person who kept to the shadows, doing the work that no one else wanted to do. But now, she was invited into the very heart of the house. It felt strange at first, but with every passing day, it became easier. The bond between her and Ethan deepened as well. They had always shared a connection, one that had always been based on a quiet, mutual respect. But now, it was more. They were learning to lean on each other, to rebuild the trust that had been broken by Charlotte's lies. They had both suffered in their own ways, and now, they were working together to heal the scars left behind. Vincent, for his part, worked hard to reconcile with the past. There was so much to atone for, so much damage done by his inability to see the truth. The guilt weighed on him daily, but the only thing he could do now was make amends. He spent more time with Ethan, asking him about his life, his thoughts, and his dreams. They didn't just talk about the past. They talked about the future. They talked about what it would mean to rebuild their relationship and how they could move forward from the wreckage of their family's history. But there was one more thing Vincent needed to do. One more person to apologize to. Lena. One evening, after dinner, Vincent found Lena sitting by the fire in the sitting room, a book in her hands, but her mind elsewhere. He approached her slowly, unsure of how to begin. "Lena," he said, his voice quiet. "I know I've already said it, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. I failed you. I failed to see the truth about Charlotte, and I failed to protect you when you needed it most." Lena looked up, meeting his eyes. There was no anger in her gaze, just a quiet understanding. She knew that apologies alone couldn't heal the wounds, but the fact that Vincent was offering them without any expectation of forgiveness, meant something. "You don't need to apologize," Lena replied softly. "You didn't know. But I'm here now, and I'm ready to move forward. All I ever wanted was to be treated with respect." Vincent nodded, his throat tightening. He couldn't undo what had happened. But maybe, just maybe, they could begin to rebuild something new. The evening was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when a family is beginning to heal. The dining room, once a place of tension and formality, now felt warm. The table was set with simple but elegant dishes, nothing extravagant, just the kind of meal that felt comfortable and real. Ethan, sitting across from his father, looked at Lena as she poured wine into their glasses. There was no longer the stiff formality that had once defined their interactions. They weren't just a broken family trying to put the pieces back together. They were a family rebuilding from the ground up. As they ate, they shared stories. Ethan and Lena talked about their favorite books, their shared memories of the mansion before it all fell apart. Vincent listened, smiling for the first time in a long while, his eyes warm with a kind of quiet pride. He hadn't realized how much he missed this, how much he had taken it all for granted. "Dad," Ethan said between bites, his voice suddenly serious, "I want you to know that I don't blame you for everything. I know you were doing your best. It's just, I'm glad we're starting over." Vincent's heart swelled with relief. It wasn't just the food or the table or the wine. It was the acknowledgement that they were both ready to move forward, together. Lena smiled, a quiet but genuine smile. "Here's to new beginnings," she said, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," Vincent echoed, his voice steady but filled with emotion. The three of them clinked their glasses together, a small but significant gesture that marked the start of a new chapter. And in that moment, the Kingston family was no longer defined by the lies of the past. They were defined by the truth they had faced, the pain they had endured, and the love that was finally starting to mend the fractures. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in a long while, they felt like a family again. The sun shone warmly through the large windows of the Kingston mansion, casting soft golden beams across the spacious living room. It was a quiet morning, the kind of morning that Vincent Kingston had not known in years, free of tension, free of the weight of lies. The mansion, which had once been filled with superficial grandeur and the hollow echoes of pretense, now felt like a home again. It was a place where trust and understanding had taken root, and where love was beginning to flourish in ways it had never before. Vincent stood by the window, gazing out at the garden. The roses, once carefully pruned and manicured to perfection, were now wild and free, much like the family inside. It was a metaphor he hadn't quite been able to shake. The house, the family, It was all different now, and it was exactly what they needed. The months since Charlotte's arrest had been a whirlwind of change. The truth had shattered everything, but in its wake, new foundations had been laid. The painful process of healing had begun, and Vincent, Ethan, and Lena were slowly learning to navigate their new lives together. The mansion that had once been a place of division and deceit now echoed with laughter and shared moments. It wasn't perfect, and the scars of the past were still visible, but there was a newfound sense of harmony within the walls. Ethan and Vincent had been working to rebuild their relationship, taking steps toward understanding each other in ways they had never done before. They still had a long way to go, but the foundation had been set, and that was the most important part. "Dad," Ethan said one afternoon as they sat in the living room, "I never thought we'd be here. I mean, after everything. After her." He trailed off, glancing over at Lena, who was sitting across from them with a soft smile. Vincent nodded, his expression serious but filled with quiet pride. "I know. I didn't think it was possible either. But we're here, Ethan. And that's what matters." Ethan looked at his father, his gaze steady. "I guess I've been so focused on what we lost that I didn't see what we still have. But I see it now. We've got each other, and that's all we really need." Lena, sitting nearby, watched the exchange between father and son with a sense of quiet gratitude. This was the family she had always hoped for, the one she had always dreamed of, even when she didn't think it was possible. The painful past was just that, the past. And now, they were writing a new story, a better one. When Lena had first returned to the Kingston mansion, she had been hesitant. She wasn't sure how to fit into the new dynamic. For so long, she had been a part of the household, but never truly a part of it. She had been the maid, the servant, the one who stayed in the background, always just out of reach. But things had changed. Vincent had made sure of that. And as the weeks passed, Lena found herself being integrated into the family in ways she had never imagined. No longer was she confined to the servants' quarters. No longer was she just a person who cleaned and served. She had become something more, a valued member of the household. She was treated with respect, with kindness, and most importantly, with equality. Vincent had been the one to make that shift, recognizing that Lena had been a cornerstone of the family for years, and he had failed to see it. He had apologized for his past mistakes, and while Lena didn't expect him to erase the past, she appreciated the sincerity of his efforts. "Lena," Vincent said one evening, sitting across from her at the kitchen table, "I've been thinking. I want you to be more involved with the decision-making around here. You've always had a sense of what works and what doesn't. I'd like you to help us build a new foundation, one where everyone's voice matters." Lena smiled, touched by the offer. "You don't have to do that, Vincent. I've never wanted to overstep my place." "Nonsense," Vincent said, shaking his head. "You're not just here to serve us, Lena. You're part of this family now. I want that to mean something." The weight of his words settled in her heart, and for the first time in a long while, Lena felt truly seen. Not as a servant, not as an outsider, but as someone who belonged. And so, Lena took on a new role, not as an employee, but as a key member of the Kingston household. She was no longer just there to clean. She helped with the planning, the organizing, the day-to-day operations of the family's life. Vincent trusted her judgment, and Ethan, too, began to see her as someone he could rely on. For Ethan, the changes in the household had not just been about repairing his relationship with his father. They had also been about understanding the complexities of family, betrayal, and trust. The last few months had opened his eyes to how fragile relationships could be, and how important it was to nurture them before they fell apart. He was no longer the boy who had blindly followed his father's lead. He was a young man, someone who could think for himself and stand up for what was right, even when it was hard. He had learned that love wasn't just about loyalty. It was about honesty, trust, and the willingness to face difficult truths. Ethan had come to realize that his past relationship with his father had been built on a false foundation, one rooted in fear and misunderstanding. But now, they were building something new, something real. "Dad," Ethan said one evening as they sat together in the garden, watching the sun set over the hills, "I've been thinking about what you said, about how we've been living in the past for so long. I guess I've been afraid to face it. But I don't want to live in fear anymore. I want us to move forward. I want us to really be a family." Vincent looked at his son, the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders for the first time in years. "I couldn't agree more. It's going to take time, but we'll get there. We'll rebuild. Together." The promise hung in the air, strong and sure. They both knew it wouldn't be easy, but it was a start, a new beginning. As Vincent stood on the balcony, watching the sun dip below the horizon, he reflected on the journey that had brought him here. It hadn't been easy, and there had been moments of unbearable pain. But now he could finally see the light. He had failed his family. He had failed his son. But he was determined to make it right. The weight of Charlotte's betrayal had been heavy, but it had opened his eyes to the people who truly mattered in his life. It had stripped away the illusions and left him with the truth. The family he had built, with all its flaws and imperfections, was the one he had to fight for. Vincent knew there was still work to be done. There would always be scars, always be moments of doubt. But the past didn't have to define their future. He had learned the hard way. But he was committed to rebuilding. Not just his marriage, but his relationship with Ethan and his bond with Lena. He had been given a second chance, and he wouldn't waste it. "Dad?" Ethan's voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. "It's time for dinner." Vincent smiled and turned to face his son. "I'll be right there." Dinner was a quiet, simple affair. The mansion, which had once been a place of formality, now felt like home. The three of them sat together at the table, Vincent, Ethan, and Lena, no longer defined by the lies of the past, but by the truth that had set them free. As they ate, the conversation flowed easily. There were no more awkward silences, no more unspoken words. They were a family again, and that was all that mattered. After dinner, they lingered at the table, talking and laughing like they had never done before. The sound of their voices filled the room, the warmth of their presence filling the once sterile walls with life. For the first time in a long while, Vincent felt at peace. His family was healing. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough.